Can we talk a little bit about, Nicola Sturgeon's arrest and then release?
It's not a rest. I'm just here for the banter.
I'm here for the coffee and the lamp. We will get harangued if we don't actually show the lamp. That's not even a...
That's a rock fact. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another Sunday Roast. And we have a special guest with us today, Jenny from Random Scottish History. Jenny, can you tell us a little bit about yourself for anyone who is unfamiliar with your channel?
Yeah, I'm Jenny. I run Random Scottish History, which is at rsh.scot. And really, I just republish old out-of-print books, pre-20th century literature to try and allow people to get to know their country a wee bit better. I've always been very open about the fact I was brought up a no-voting Tory, and it was actually just reading some of Scotland's history and getting to know the place a wee bit better that entirely changed my perspective. So we now have the website, we've got 8 publications, there's 170 odd videos on YouTube, and there are podcasts out there of a lot of the YouTube videos. So, and I exist purely because of my patrons, so I'll say hi to them just now.
Alex, can you tell us a bit about yourself for anyone who is new to the show?
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm also known as Political X, and I'm also a historian. And Max, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, guys. My name is Max. I run the Robespierre channel where I talk about British politics and Brexit in particular. Alex, what's our first topic for today?
Let's talk question time, because that was some seriously messed up propaganda by the BBC. I know there was a complaints campaign also put forward towards stopping the BBC doing such a insane program. Essentially 5 guests and an audience. The audience was made up of Brexiteers from various parties. 70%, at least according to the show, were still pro-Brexit. 20% were supposedly against Brexit. Now they changed their mind, and 10% were still unsure about Brexit. So they've gone from being sure to unsure, which is fascinating. And the panel was made up of 5, not including presenter Fiona Bruce. And from that 5, we also had basically 3 Brexiteers, an economist that was sort of in the middle ground. I couldn't imagine Adam Posson agreeing with him in any way, shape or form. And we also had Alistair Campbell, who was literally there on his own. And you could tell had to bite his tongue because he was literally surrounded.
And I don't blame you for voting. I blame them for lying to you. They lied. They've not been properly held to account. Johnson's gone for lying about COVID. He's still not properly been held accountable for Brexit. And we're all of us paying a higher price in our cost of living and everything else because of the lies that we were told.
But there was there were 2 interesting, well, there were 3 interesting ones that I saw. So first was there was a businessman who was just he voted obviously he voted for Brexit because the audience was made entirely of people who voted for Brexit. I don't call them Brexiteers because for me, Brexiteer is somebody who now thinks Brexit was a good idea. And that could be somebody who voted Remain or voted for Brexit. Because a lot of... after the show, I saw an article in The Guardian where they said just 18% of voters still think Brexit is a good idea, which is still massively high, I think, but 18%. But there was a businessman who had voted for Brexit, and then he, you probably saw it, Alex, where he was challenged by, was it he sold computer parts or he sold computers? Yeah, and so he was talking about the problems getting components in. But Ben Habib, the former member of the Brexit Party, what was it that Ben Habib had said to him? Or
Ben Habib, I'll be frank. He basically stepped in and said, "What's your problem?" The guy said, "I can't get computer components across. I've got red tape, and that means I've lost money, which I then have to pass on to the customers. So there's a smaller profit margin." And Ben Habib turned around and essentially said, "I don't give a stuff about your individual problems because the bigger picture is trade hasn't changed." That's literally what he said, and that's why I would call him an asshole. I'll probably have to bleep this out because at the beginning of the show we'll get demonetized. But that's essentially it. What are your thoughts on that, Max?
I'm surprised he didn't go down the sovereignty route. Well, at least we got our sovereignty back.
Doesn't think that.
No, but Yeah, Ben Habib, but he doesn't care about small business owners. He doesn't care about ordinary people who are impacted by this. Like, for example, Jenny, I know the Scottish fishermen generally voted against Brexit, but they have suffered a great deal as
Quite catastrophic. I urge ministers and the EU Commission to get round the table to get this bureaucratic nonsense calmed down a bit and get goods flowing.
But I mean, there was that protest. It wasn't a very good protest for they ended up down at Westminster. I mean, we've all just been dragged into this, and even we know that the Brexiteers are coming round to the fact that this is like, this is terrible. They're realizing every time they go on holiday, this is bollocks. Do you know what I mean? Like,
well, it's not Brexit's fault. It's the EU trying to punish Britain. No?
Oh, yeah, of course it is. But even should that be the case, this is a really crap situation. Do you know what I mean? Like, very few of us are seeing benefits as a result of this 2016 vote.
Debt collectors,
Yeah.
people who repossess houses shortly.
Maybe they're seeing a benefit.
Yeah,
That's
don't
about
get me
it.
wrong. There are people definitely seeing like financial gain for this, because if there weren't, the Tories wouldn't have even considered it in the first place. Do you know what I mean? Everything they do is for financial benefit to some large corporation or other. There are definitely people making a mint from Brexit, but we're talking like the 99.5% of us are just coming up across the odd issue just every so often, whether it's in food, whether it's in prices, travel, like whatever. We're all coming up against at least one.
Yeah, I'd like Jenny.
moment,
Maybe
you
you
know,
to
like-
maybe I'd like you to tell us about your experience in a moment. But I just want to just go back to question time. So there was that business owner who was told basically to shut the f up by Ben Habib. Then there was a guy who said that he he saw people arrive in Britain, and then he followed them allegedly to the benefits office. I didn't know there was a benefits office. I know there's the job
There's a
center,
job centre.
the benefit office, and he followed them to the benefits office and saw them arrive. So they arrived by plane, I believe, or on a ferry, and then they would go straight to the benefits office. Now, in the comment section, everyone was saying this is impossible. Okay, this doesn't happen, but it does. But you would believe it if you got all of your information from the Express or the Daily Mail or the Sun. So,
Or if you were the people smuggler, which
yeah.
you could well be. That's the only other explanation. Is that he's the one smuggling the people in and then taking them down the job centre and trying it
Yeah,
on.
maybe. But I think
This way, by the way, just so I can prove a point. If you want
Yeah.
to go that road, just second left. You know.
But I think the best audience member had to be the older lady who was upset about health and safety standards. So she was complaining that in Germany, I don't know why she chose Germany as an example, but she said in Germany and France, I believe, people on roofs didn't have to follow safety standards, while in Britain they did have to follow safety standards, and that made, I don't know, building houses more expensive or something. And that's why she voted to leave, to have, I believe, lower safety standards. Now, what's interesting about all of this is that during the construction of the football stadiums in Qatar, 6,500 people died. Now, not all of those, of course, are people who fell off buildings or are related directly to the building, but also some of it was probably due to the heat. But do you know how many people died in the construction of the Olympic Stadium in London in 2012?
Is it 12?
No, less.
Zero.
That's because of health and safety standards. That's why they're so important. Now, if individual countries don't implement them, that's a different issue, but that's nothing to do with the EU. But this lady said, yeah, I voted to leave, so we would have, I presume, we could have lower safety standards.
That's a brave stance for her to take.
Yes. I don't think she was up on many roofs recently.
I did point out, though, earlier, just before we came on air, Ben Habib was complaining about 5.7 million people being on benefits, which would technically, by the looks of it, I would assume include her. So he would have her up on that roof, or he would have her catching criminals. not being funny, but
Trailing people going from the airport to the benefits office.
Dude thinks he's all MI5.
But again, it's this. Well, migration came up, didn't it, as an issue? That was another thing that Brexiteers seem to be angry about, the 600,000. But interestingly, no one brought up our birth rate, which is plummeting to Japanese levels of the 1990s. No one's talking about that. We have not got the ability to sustain our population because we've had a decade or decade and a half of low birth rate. And it doesn't help when the economy is crap and there's no social welfare support or limited. And it's interesting to see that they're going, well, we don't want more people, but we want social care and healthcare. And you're going, well, where are you going to get these people from? You've got to encourage the youth generation to have more kids, but you don't want to give them support and welfare. I mean, I heard someone on LBC going mad this week.
I'm 70-something.
Yes.
And I am fed up with having to subsidise cheap mortgages for overprivileged 20 and 30-somethings during millennials for the last 10 years. I started work in 1963, which is probably about before you were born. Mm-hmm. But I've been paying my taxes ever since. I've been putting money aside because I've been told you've got to put money aside, put some kind of pension for your old age. I did. But what happens when I get to be 65? I suddenly have to start subsidising mortgages for other people and have nothing to live on. So that really is the point of my beef. I'm really fed up with it.
Do you mean subsidising because of the very low interest rates, so your savings not being worth as much as you had hoped?
I'm getting 0.55%, well, it's going up a little bit now, 0.55% on my, which is the best I could get on my savings. And people are getting mortgages for 1.5%, 2%. Well, hooray for them. However, bear in mind that when they took out their mortgages a year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, they had to do a stress test, which meant that while your mortgage might not be 1.5% for long, it might go up to 4 or 5%. So they had to work out sums. Could they afford it when it did go up? Well, it has gone up. Well, tough. They've got to do with a little bit less of the replacing the mobile phone every year for the most fashionable one, and start paying me to borrow my money to pay for their mortgage.
Okay, Dewey.
Do I sound nasty enough? Or I'm a grumpy old bugger, I know.
You don't sound nasty. You sound like a man who's had a decade of not having his savings make any money for him. So I understand your frustration. But I don't think the young people involved set out to hurt you. That would be the difference.
They obviously neglect and forget to mention that wages now are 11 times that of a mortgage. And it was in the 1980s. But
houses were much cheaper, and wages were increasing, while wages have stagnated for the last, I think, 13 years or 15 years. No. Just on the issue of Brexit, I was wondering, Jenny, can you tell us a little bit about your experience of Brexit? Because yours was maybe something that many people may not have heard of, a particular problem.
Yeah, I hadn't heard anything about this specific change in travel. I had booked to have a trip to Italy along with Alex, my husband, and
You're not married. Just to be clear, because otherwise my partner is going to
a different Alex.
Different Alex.
Different Alex. Great name, by the way. Great name.
So we're all packed. Everything's sorted. They've got my passport details. Everything has come back. Good to go. We're all packed. We get ourselves to Edinburgh for a super early morning flight. It was 5:50 in the morning or something. Get to Edinburgh airport and everything's fine, and we get on the plane. But as we're getting on the plane, the Swissport person, just the one that checks your passport before you board a plane, she's like, "Your passport's expired, by the way." But she doesn't stop me from going on to plane, and I'm like, "No, it's not. It ends in 8 months. I've got 8 months left on my passport." And there's something kind of 3 months, 6 month thing where you have to have that amount on the end before you travel. But that's fine. I had 8 months at the end of my passport. It was fine.
Yeah, the date was sometime in 2024.
Yeah, February next year or May of next year. And then, so I'm like, you have to explain this to me. And all she said was, your passport's expired. I hope you're not traveling anywhere else. And I'm like, this is all so bizarre. So I got on the plane and I'm starting to freak out a little bit. And Alex is like, well, we'll ask the flight attendant, like, if she has an idea. So we show a passport to the flight attendant, and the flight attendant's like, no, it looks absolutely fine. I can't see that there's a problem with it at all. And I would complain about that Swissport lassie for getting you all freaked out, kind of thing, you know. I'm like, right, okay, but okay, I'm just feeling like this is a very strange scenario. So we end up in Stansted, do all the checking online, everything's fine, and then we get around and I'm told, you're not going anywhere, your passport is expired. I'm like, right, I've already had a hint of this. I need someone to explain what's going on because I have 8 months left. She's like, no, Brexit. I'm like, what? She's like, Brexit means your passport's expired. And I'm like, I'm right, talk to me like I'm a child, you know? So she's like, okay, so it now has to be within 10 years of date of issue. And back up until 2013, when you got your passport renewed, if you had any time left on your old passport, it would get added to the 10 years of your new passport. So technically, 10 years from the date of issue for my passport was a week and a half before I travelled. So my passport had expired like a week and a half before my trip was due to happen. I'm like, what the? Fine. Okay. You know, you can't change it, you know, and I'd never heard, I'd never come across any, like, information anywhere that was hinting towards something like that. So I send Alex on, because I'm like, well, one of us might as well enjoy themselves. So he heads on, and had an excellent few days in Florence, which I missed out on, but, you know, and so I have to get back up to Scotland. So I get a train from Stansted, and it's like 140 quid just to get me back up to Scotland. The flight provider to get to, they weren't willing to recompense any part of my flight that I couldn't take. It was all my fault. So I took a train up, and King's Cross station was evacuated for no known reason. I just make my train, and there's been a issue with a bridge, so we have to stop for ages and then crawl over the bridge. And then just as soon as we get over the bridge, a tree had down the lines over the rail up at Carlisle, and we were stuck. So I got in 2 hours late, like, to Glasgow, and I posted a picture of myself just looking frazzled, just like, what the fuck is going on, you know? Like, so £200.
But there is
a week later, I get a new passport, and I literally timed it so that on collection of my passport, it was a taxi straight to the airport and onto another flight, like, to go and try and catch up on my holiday. You know?
Sorry, how did you get a passport that quick? I heard waiting times 6 months to a year or something. They got rid of the backlog, or is it better in Scotland?
I don't know. So what I did on the train, because I had so much time on this freaking train back up to Glasgow, I'm just I'm investigating, like, applying for a passport. I'm just looking at everything that I can find as a way to fast track the thing. And I went onto their site, and it just seemed to be pretty easy. Just literally priority passport application. And you fill it all in. I had a passport photo in my wallet, so I just took a picture of that, cropped it, sent it. It was approved. And yeah, by the time I reached Scotland, I had my appointment so that was the Wednesday, and I had my appointment for the Tuesday morning at the passport office to pick it up.
Wow.
But it was £200. I mean, it wasn't like a drop in the ocean. It was
something works in this country when you pay for it.
Yeah.
That's the way the Tories want to go. But it was a sort of happy ending that you did eventually get over.
Yeah.
And you did get to
We'll not get into the way back, because that had nothing to do with Brexit.
It's not a Brexit problem. I have a few Brexit stories, but they're not as dramatic as that. For example, Mrs. Max bought online from the UK, really nice things, you know, and what happened is things would arrive, and then you'd have to pay customs duty. And the problem here in Italy is that you have to pay in cash. So somebody would ring the doorbell, you go out and you say, I have a package for you, and you have to pay like 46 quid. And you're like, I don't have that money on me now. Okay, then we'll come back in a few days' time, and you have to have, so you can't pay by credit card, you can't pay by debit card, you have to pay only in cash. They'll only accept cash.
Been here long? Yeah, long enough. Come on, give me the cash.
So you have to go and look for cash for something that maybe isn't, doesn't have a huge value. But if you're buying clothes or something like that, there's customs duties. Now, of course, this didn't exist before. You could simply go online, buy something from the UK. It would arrive in a few days. But now there are massive delays. And when it arrives, in many cases, if it's not below a certain, I think if it's under 22 euros, which is about £20, if it's below that, then there isn't a customs duty. But I haven't checked on any recent updates, but it's about that. But if it's above that, you have to pay customs duty, and it can be a massive amount of money as well if you're buying something pretty expensive from outside the European Union. So I'm talking about people who are in the EU, in the single market. If you're buying something from outside, like the US or the UK or China, you have to pay a customs duty, which can be very expensive. Now, if I decided I'm not going to pay it, it would be returned to the business that sold it in the UK, and then they would have to pay the costs. So I bet there's no benefit here for either side. So go on.
This is my biggest fear. The EU is just looking at us as a cash cow because we're not checking anything that's coming in. And I've got a sneaking suspicion, just based on running some numbers, we're spending somewhere in the region of about we're giving them about 50 billion a year in tax revenue. And I know, isn't it? So I'm like, they've cut off our services industry. Ben Habib thinks that we can get that back, although he wants us to have a border, from what I can tell, in Ireland, on the island of Ireland. He wants a physical border. That's pretty much what it was. It's either that or he wants his cake and eating it. No one really pressed him to pinpoint exactly what he wanted. It's either he wants a hard border, which goes against the Good Friday Agreement, but he doesn't care about that. Or he wants some sort of, who cares, let's just trade and just let everything go, which is like, I don't want to pay for the membership fee, but I want access to the club. Only a pretentious...
I don't know he knows what he wants himself, because if you want to, like he say, we should get rid of the border in the Irish Sea. And then what? Where do you put it? But he doesn't want...
He wants a hard border.
Okay, then
I think that's the only solution.
Yeah, but a hard border, the people of Ireland don't want a hard border. So you'd have a Brexiteer living in England saying, we're going to put a hard border where you don't want it. Now, the people of Ireland didn't vote in the Republic. They didn't vote for Brexit. And a majority of people in Northern Ireland voted against Brexit. So why should they listen to somebody who isn't even elected? Like, he was a member of the European Parliament, but he's not elected now. He's not an MP. Why the hell was he invited on to Question Time?
Reform.
But he's a member of Reform. He's not even elected. But we would have as much reason to be on Question Time. We're not elected either. He's a guy with an opinion. That's all he is.
We have
pretty bad one as well.
More supporters, probably.
Yeah.
It's a joke. It's just a joke, Max. I don't understand. I'll give you a stat. You'll like this. I got a good stat. UK MEPs who appeared on BBC Question Time in 2010 to 20. How many do you think were pro-EU as a percentage? Starting from as low as 0 to 100%. Jenny, how do you think were pro-EU MEPs that appeared on Question Time over the decade 2010 to 2020?
Like less than 50, maybe 40, 35, 40.
40, 35%.
Yeah,
And Max?
I'd say about 10%.
10%, you think? It's quite a low figure. The answer is 1.8%.
Jesus.
Zero from Labour.
Wait, hang a minute.
Yeah.
For all those years combined?
Yep, for a decade. 0 Labour MEPs, 0 SNP MEPs, 0 Green MEPs. Plaid Cymru, nope. The only one they had was a Lib Dem. One Lib Dem. Voden, which I think was in 2016. And they had 45 UKIP MEPs, 3 Conservative MEPs, 8 Brexit Party MEPs. 1.8%.
They cannot at all, at any chance, claim to be an impartial media outlet.
I will say this: that's only MEPs. They might have balanced it in different ways, but isn't it weird that it's MEPs? Because, like, if you're going to have the Brexit argument, in theory, you have to have, building up to that, you have to have at least one Brexiteer on there, which inevitably would be Nigel Farage, who I think turned up
every time.
21 times. 22 times he was on that program.
You know, like
out of 57.
Wow.
It's a joke. And then we watched that. They haven't had a Rejoin EU party on yet. Which is the only party standing for Rejoin at the moment. I mean, the Labour Party member that was on there was Brexiteers a breakfast.
She was the Labour MP who was on, I believe, was saying, well, yeah, we're going to make Brexit work.
We've got stuff in this country that's good. Services, culture, media, sport. There's loads of exports. Government hate culture, media, and sport. We heard that with that with that maths comment mixed in with a transphobic comment from Rishi Sunak. He's obsessed with maths, even though, I mean, arithmetic is long gone. There's a thing called a calculator, Rishi. There's a thing called a calculator. There's also a thing called AI, which can now run verbal mathematics, verbal equations, you know, like train leaves at this time, when would they meet in the middle? If they're both going at different speeds and whatever. But culture, AI can't build that. I've seen it try.
The music industry. You know, I had a musician on recently on my channel, and he was just talking about the damage Brexit is doing. You know, the music industry is worth so much to Britain. And what did they focus on in 2020? Fishing, which is big as, and I don't know if this is true, but somebody told me, as big as the lawnmower industry. You know.
Yes, I think that was The Economist. I think that was David Hennig who we had on the show said that. And the CPTTP, which they brought up in question time, that's the equivalent of toilet paper, which I now call it. I call it the TP agreement. It's the toilet paper agreement. That's how much it's worth. It's worth the equivalent of our toilet paper, because we already had those agreements. It was funny that got brought up in, we've got all these new trade agreements. It's like, no. You've already got them with Canada, Japan, Chile, I think, and Mexico. So,
but when you were saying about question time in the past, like what they should have had was Nigel Farage on one side when he was a member of the European Union, a member of the European Parliament, and they should have had another MEP on the other side. That would have been a balanced argument. Because whatever Farage was saying, the journalist or whoever was on the other side didn't have the experience. They didn't know the ins and outs of the European Parliament. So if you had an MEP on the other side, they'd say, no, Nigel, that's not how it works. But he was free to say whatever he wanted. He would say, look at all these committees they have. It's a waste of money. It's a waste of time. You know, all it is a talking shop. They don't actually do anything. And he went unchallenged because the journalist was, okay, well, I'm not supposed to ask him questions. He probably knows. And if you had, you know, an economist on, well, they don't know the ins and outs of the European Parliament. So they'd be able to challenge him on economics, but they wouldn't be able to challenge him on the workings of the Parliament.
Well, you still hear it today. People claim it's a dictatorship. And you're like, what are you talking about? We were in it. We could make votes. We've got less democracy now. I keep saying this. There's 380 people. Ministers can now overwrite Parliament with a signature on a piece of paper. They bypass Parliament because Parliament gave them the rules, because Parliament can pass any rules. It's an authoritarian state. I mean, we could segue nicely into Scotland. They've told Scotland, no, you can't leave, which the EU couldn't do, but they can. So how does that work? Jenny?
It's a union of equals, no, Jenny?
Yeah, it's a union of equals. Everyone's fair. We've got more democracy in the British Union than the European Union, haven't we, Jenny? Oh, we're staring up at your hornet's nest.
Yeah, no, still the least represented, most underfunded, most taxed part of the UK. So nothing's changed. Only now we have less support because Brexit. The businesses have all been affected. There's just I'm fairly positive that things are going to work themselves out. I've said it a lot that there are a lot of impatient people out there. Again, they're going to keep stirring the pot, and they're going to keep like railing against the people that are actually trying to do a thing just because they're not doing a thing fast enough, you know. But we're not going to see any change in 5 years. I don't. I think that we will spend that time making contacts. I think that our best chance here is to have the UN involved, have countries recognise Scotland as an entity who deserves the resumption of its full self-determination. That's all we really need, is for recognition to be made transparent by countries just willing to come out and say the thing, you know, publicly, you know, announce, listen, sure, because we're doing a lot of international relations stuff at the moment, which you can see because the papers are full of people railing against Scotland taking on too much. Well, they don't feel like Scotland has a right to promote itself abroad, you know, like that's for Westminster to do, because obviously they do that so well. I think maybe 10 years we'll maybe see something, but I think we have to start just trusting that there are people in power and with the capability to get us where we're going. They have the reins, and we just have to just trust that they know what they're doing. But on the other hand, they also have to be as transparent as they're able to be, because they have to get in front of the arguments of the distractors. They have to be able to say, we have no financial issues. Here are our financials. Go through them. We don't care. Look, we've spent everything exactly how we should have. Everything's accounted for, you know. There's no issue here. They need to get out in front of the arguments, because if you pay even 10% notice to social media, you can see where the backlash is going to come from. You can see what the next distraction talking point is going to be. So it's not going to be hard for them to put a wee team together to just focus on that and transparency, you know. Just let them get on. But I think we're looking at a decade before anything material occurs. I don't know that we're going to get anything sooner than that. And
in terms of economics, or that Scotland being able to have a referendum.
We are stuck in the mire, metaphorically. We're fecked until we're able to either secure some kind of EFTA deal, which is a possibility for Scotland, or rejoin the EU, which is also a possibility for Scotland. There's no one really coming out going, that is absolutely never a possibility. You're never going to be able to re-enter. There's going to be hurdles put in your way. No. The only hurdles that we've seen put in our way are from Westminster, not from the European Union.
Mm-mm.
So we have...
Which, if you joined, you could leave whenever you want. But in the UK, you're forced to stay.
We have to have
the
self-determination in order to then strike the international deals, because that's what the Treaty of Union is actually being stuck to, in a sense here. That the Westminster government was to be the imperial parliament and deal with international relations on behalf of Scotland and England. So Scotland, and a lot of pro-self-determinationists in Scotland, those that are all on side with a dissolution of the Union, they actually haven't really wrapped their heads around the fact that Holyrood, as nice as it is to have it there and have the devolved powers, is nothing more than a branch office of Westminster. And Westminster have been proving that fact recently. You pass a bill, Westminster comes down and goes, no, you don't get that. Bottle return stream, nah, we're getting in the way of your recycling now because we feel like we want to do that. You know, just they're proving the point that we're not much more than a branch office, and we can't really operate outside of those bounds. We haven't the authority. The authority is going to come from outside factions, other countries who are willing to say a thing, because once a thing is said, there's the potential for the thing to happen, you know. So we just need countries to say, we're on side with Scotland. We believe that they can join EU. We believe they have a choice of EFTA. We believe that they can do it by themselves, and they have full right to have control over their own borders and finances and not be interfered with by a foreign government down at Westminster. That's what we need.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I've never heard the SNP make the statement that it's a dictatorship in Westminster. Have I missed out? Have I missed something? No, I heard that precise word.
No, I don't think that they'd have used that term. They're more diplomatic than that, I think, in the main.
No, I just wanted to ask a question. This is a question for maybe, a unionist from the Labour Party or the Tories in Scotland or Liberal Democrats in Scotland. Would be, how can Scotland become independent? Because, is it through a referendum? Is it through just a de facto referendum through an election? They're never asked the question, how can Scotland become independent? They talk about, well, there was a vote, a generation ago, and it's once in every generation. But what is actually the process? First of all, can Scotland become independent? I think that would be the first question. Can Scotland become independent? That's the question I'd love to ask a unionist in Scotland. Can Scotland become independent? And then what is the process? Now, I've never heard anyone ask that question, and I've never heard anyone answer that question.
Representative of the SNP, Jenny.
I'm really not. Don't believe this guy. No, I don't know how to answer this. You're not hearing it asked and answered in Scotland, but after the Supreme Court decision, the decision that said we weren't a colony and therefore we had no recourse, but by making its decision somehow seemed to make us appear more of a colony. So
the answer would be no.
Well, so no, so it's in Scotland. There's no positive case for the union. We know this, right? The answer is always a straight up no. Scotland can't leave the union, and it seems to be more for stubbornness than for logical, kind of critical thinking reasons. They're not really looking into the positives and negatives in order to be able to make an informed decision on the thing. It's an emotional decision from the unionists up here. So they're going to say no, and then they're not going to be able to back that up in any kind of significant way. But we saw after the Supreme Court decision that the SNP had 5 or 6 questions that the Prime Minister's questions, and they made use of them in an identical manner just to make the point. They stood up one by one and said, what is our route to leave the union? No answer. We're better together is the answer. Fantastic. That doesn't answer. So the next person stands up. Hiya. Just wondering, is there a way that we could maybe do a thing to be able to leave the union? We're better together. Oh, right. But that wasn't an answer. Here, my colleague will maybe get, is there a way for Scotland to leave the union? And it went on like that for every single person that had a question. There was no issue they wanted answered more at that point after the Supreme Court decision. No, we're not giving you a route out, we're better together. But
aren't they using Remainer rhetoric?
Yeah, it's been really weird up here to be able to see the Brexit arguments and referendum in the same light as the referendum for Scottish self-determination that took place a couple of years previous to that. And we've been able to watch how it's almost backwards, the Brexit votes, that a lot of the arguments that the Brexiteers were using were exactly the arguments that the Scots were using in order to leave the Union 2 years previously. So
essentially,
it's been very strange for the same people to have the polar opposite view of what is in effect just another union, the ability to either stay in or leave a union.
That's because, the economic damage would be huge.
For
everyone. Well, everyone. I'll be more diplomatic than that. That's a bad way of phrasing it. I think the economic damage to the United Kingdom would be huge. I think the economic damage to England would be significant. I think you would have a downturn in Scotland, but if you then applied to the EU, we've seen with other countries that have had similar issues of separation from
Is this in the event of Scottish self-determination you're talking about?
In the event of success, okay. You would see everyone does. So you could look at the Czech Republic, sure. Czechoslovakia. You can see that there was an immediate downturn because they separated. They set up 2 parliaments, Czech Republic and Slovakia. But once they joined, you could see that there was an economic upturn that happened within about a 7-year period. And as a result, you can turn around and say, you might have that, but then you'll have that. And of course, the big difference with Scotland is when you look at it in an economic perspective and compare it to Czechoslovakia and the Czech Republic and Slovakia, you can see that you are far ahead of either the Czech Republic or Slovakia. So, for example, your banking and services industry is far ahead. The only thing that would be probably contentious or concern would be the border with England and Scotland. How would
there
that?
There are options for that. There are so many options for that.
There are options. There are always options. But interestingly, you would probably see an upturn in trade with Northern Ireland because you'd have easier access to Northern Ireland, and you'd have easier access to the EU. So it's very interesting to see what it is.
Some out there might have seen me as a pessimist when I'm saying that I don't think there's going to be any change in 5 years, like other than, you know, international relations, that I don't think we'll see anything pertinent for a decade, you know. My feeling post self-determination is completely different. I don't believe it's going to take us the 7 years. I mean, we're going to be, if you think of how much, and Humza Yousaf has just recently come out with a video that I was literally just saying to Max that he had to come out and say this thing, he had to repeat it, and then he literally did it like within 24 hours, you know. He was saying that Scots literally have been able to mitigate so much of the issues that come out from Westminster, societal issues in terms of impoverishing people and denying them welfare, etc., that the Scottish Government has been able to mitigate so many of those insidious issues throughout the Scottish societies, the countries, the towns and cities, sorry. They've managed to kind of really do a really good job of that. They've also been able to keep education free. They've managed to keep healthcare free and free from privatization in the main, unlike what we're seeing down south. They're having been able to do all of this with this amount that we get back from this amount that we send. The moment we get self-determination, we have this to spend instead of this.
You'd have your own banking industry.
We've already done an exceptional job of using this, you know? So, and we've been fettered so long that should the Scottish Government get their hands on this, their habit would be to literally make them one of the most economically sound and well-budgeted governments on the planet. Do you know what I mean? Because they've been constrained for so long that with this amount, think of the possibilities. Do you know what I mean? And they're not likely to just blow it all on test and trace systems that don't work, and blow enough to have sent the Mars rover up. I mean, just spaffing it up a wall. Do you know what I mean? Just getting rid of like billions of pounds. You're not going to see that via a Scottish Government with full self-determination. I think that we're going to be like something like kind of light to kind of follow, like in terms of politics and economics and that. I think we could do really well. And I don't think it would take your 7 years.
You've nicely segued into COVID, which I wasn't necessarily expecting to talk about, but the inquiry did come up and you brought it up. And it's also to do with Scottish independence. If the government in Westminster wants to follow a policy of herd immunity, which it did, you've got to follow a policy of herd immunity. If the government decides that during a pandemic they want to have the borders open, you have to follow that, even if it's totally insane and it's corporate manslaughter. And it was interesting, you were just talking about, interestingly, that we've had a track and trace system. We had it with HIV. But for some reason, they decided not to use that system or develop it further for a pandemic. But instead, they went and tried to build a brand new one from scratch, which completely failed. Most people don't know that there's a track and trace system for HIV in the UK. Yeah, it's pretty shocking.
News to me.
Yeah. I think it's existed for over 10 years. They haven't developed anything like that for over 2-3 decades because they don't give a crap about the public and the poor. The point I was going to get at was the COVID inquiry. According to Cameron and Osborne, spending less on the NHS means a better NHS.
Do you accept, Mr. Cameron, that the health budgets over the time of your government were inadequate and led to a depletion in its ability to provide an adequate service?
I don't accept that, neither on a sort of big picture level or on a small picture level. I mean, the big picture level, I don't think you can separate
the decision and the necessity of getting the budget deficit down and having a reasonable debt to GDP ratio so you can cope with future crises. I don't think you can separate that from the funding of the health service or indeed anything else. I mean, if you lose control of your debt and you lose control of your deficit and you lose control of your economy, you end up cutting the health service. That's what happened in Greece. That's what happened in countries that did lose control of their finances. So I don't think you can separate the two.
Thoughts? Facts?
Oh God, I've said this before. It's about pushing more and more people into the private sector. It's about and you know, when people think of the private sector, private healthcare, they think of private hospitals, and it's not always the case. In many cases, it's you have the same NHS doctor working privately and using a space in a public hospital. So, but it's about. We don't care about the NHS, so we would prefer people just to go privately. And I think that's been the push for some time. But it's not just about healthcare, it's also other aspects within healthcare, within the NHS. For example, you know, cleaning services or maintenance or things like that. A lot of this has been privatized as well. So, you know, there have been stories of people. There was a time when you went into hospital, you were delivered to a surgery, whatever, in a wheelchair by somebody who was hired and paid by the NHS, but this has all been outsourced to private contractors. And we see also the problems with nursing, where also because of Brexit, the NHS can't get the nurses they need in England and Wales. So what they're doing is they're outsourcing this to agency staff. And of course, the agencies are making huge amounts of money out of this because you have an NHS nurse which is on whatever amount per year, 22,000 starting out or something like that, and then you have a contracted nurse, and in some cases they're paying like thousands a week for this staff. But the nurse isn't earning the money; the agency is, and this is what privatization. I think this is the main part of the privatization, not so much about sending people into private clinics, but the privatization within the NHS itself. So when people say, well, you know, where is all this money going? It's going into these private organizations, these private companies. They're the ones who are, you know, claiming or taking in. These are the ones who are taking a huge slice out of the NHS budget. So yeah, it's about pushing more and more people into the private sector when it comes to healthcare, but also privatization within the NHS itself. And it's going to take a mammoth task to undo that. It's not something you're going to see in one parliament, even if Labour say, yeah, we're going to undo the privatisation of the NHS.
They spend less under the coalition than Margaret Thatcher, the milk snatcher. And they're telling you that austerity isn't the thing that caused the pandemic. Because why would they admit culpability?
Yeah.
Because that would then lead to a potential charge of corporate manslaughter.
I've said, like, what is the point of a government if it doesn't look after the health and education and welfare of its citizens? What is the point of having a government? I
was trying to think of a villain. Is it Bane from Batman, Thanos from the MCU, Zod from Superman? I mean, the closest I can come up with is Burke from the movie Aliens, who seems to be more interested in profit and getting to the number one spot than the lives of others around him, which is telling. There was also a doctor that was on LBC. I've unfortunately forgotten his name. I think Maron, I think it is, who basically specializes in population and disease. And he was basically saying, if you came up with a hypothesis that they were trying to break the NHS or privatize it, and that was the hypothesis, everything they're doing is towards a privatization to make it look like it's broken down. So they have to step in and go, right, socialism doesn't work, let's eradicate it, which they all seem to hate. Jenny? I
mean, in terms of like the NHS in Scotland, it's not going the privatisation route in quite the same way as the English is. I mean, I follow a lot of people on Twitter, so there's I was just looking up her Twitter there because I wanted to make sure I'd got it right. So it's Dr. Julia Grace Patterson on Twitter. She's at Julia Grace, and she is really very good at keeping people up to date on the privatisation issue and the MPs that are bought and sold for the purposes of NHS privatisation. Sorry. So she makes for a really good account to follow if you want kept up to date on everything surrounding that. In Scotland, our issue comes from Brexit. We need the staff, we need the nurses in, but also it's compounded with Westminster's already standing efforts to stop immigration. You know, where Scotland needs immigration, we welcome immigration, we're totally inclusive. Scottish nationalism isn't the same as other nationalisms. Other nationalisms seem to be quite exclusive, and it's very much our country for us, screw you kind of patriotism. Scotland wants people from everywhere to come and live here, and you're an honorary Scot the moment you land. Do you know what I mean? Like this, we are going to do our best to help and support a person, you know. We've been trying to maintain that against everything Westminster's been trying to do to stop it. So it's not so much privatisation that's an issue in Scotland. So I'd not want to
for just to clarify, immigration is a reserved matter, so the Scottish Parliament don't have control over immigration.
No, and we have a lot of need for immigration. Like, we're only like 5 million of a population, you know, and obviously like that's from the back of a historical attempt to get rid of as much of us as possible, you know.
Yeah, I think it must be extremely frustrating for the Scottish Parliament, because they would say, look, we would like to bring in people to work in the NHS, to work in social care. We could we could try and get a Section 30 from Westminster, which would allow the Scottish government to take control of immigration even for a limited amount of time. But the Westminster would say, no, we're not going to give that.
But do you know, the person that actually highlighted those issues more than any other kind of recently, so to speak, was a Scottish Labour leader, Richard Leonard, because every time he would stand up at First Minister's questions, he would go, "You're not doing this thing. You have to do this thing. This thing needs sorted. Fix this." And Nicola Sturgeon only just had to stand up every single time and go, "That's not an issue that we're able to deal with. That's like reserved to Westminster to deal with. So if you want us to do this thing, like, come over, help us like gain our self-determination, help us gain the right to dictate or determine that issue, and I will get in about it, no bother," you know. Every single time he stood up, like, he had no idea what was devolved or not. So he made a really good kind of unwilling participant in propaganda for Scotland. You know, just going.
But I'm also thinking, like, I just as you're saying that, but I'm also thinking about London, for where, Alex, you're in London, and you know the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has, you know, he's welcoming immigration, but of course his hands are tied as well. Of course, Scotland and London are two separate things, but I think the openness to immigration is similar, and you know, they would London would love to have the ability to say, yeah, we're going to issue more visas to bring people in. But of course, it's another case of the tail wagging the dog, where the Tories are chasing these racist and bigoted vote at the expense of everyone else.
The economic problems that have been created by the Tory government and by, frankly, capitalism, instead of taking issue with that, they've just gone, foreigners. And even the ones that are related or have a heritage that's more direct in a few generations of their parents, grandparents, great-grandparents being immigrants, have turned around and said, no, it's foreigners coming over, there's too many. But it doesn't deal with the key problem, which I've been going on about for weeks. What's happened to Japan in the 1990s? Shinzo Abe couldn't fix the economic problems. It improved the economy through socialist policies and migration, but it didn't resolve it because the population's shrinking. And we've got similar numbers. Even if you put in policies now to encourage more children to be born, it doesn't work like that. This is a decade, 2-decade problem. It's long term, and no one's talking about it. And it's the same issues with Brexit. There's issues, and we've got two parties that are in complete denial. I often think, imagine if you'd had a football team in the Premier League, and you basically said, we could set up a better league. We're going to force 3 other teams out to come and join us in that league against their will. And and they're going to come in, and we're going to have a great league. In fact, our league is going to be better than the Premier League, and it's just a 4-team thing. And instead, you end up with less money, and the main culprit of all of this is in the relegation zone out of that top 4. Like, you'd be sacked on the spot if you pulled any of this stuff. You'd be sacked. It's just mad, and it's interesting the how it all ebbs and flows, and they'll take whatever argument suits them. So they'll use Remainer arguments for Scotland, but they'll use racist arguments for the EU, and you're just like, what is this? It's a joke. That's what it is, and it's the faults of capitalism and extinguishing socialist policies.
But you just have to know that everything is going to turn out exactly how it is regardless, so you might as well just watch it happen, and survive as best you can.
But if you were in the Premier League, you said, right, we've got all this investment, it's going to be brilliant, we've got this brand new team, brand new manager comes in, we're going to win the Champions League, and we're going to come first in the Premier League, and then the relegation zone. What would happen to that manager, and what would probably happen to that owner? What would happen? The fans would go nuts. They'd go nuts. And imagine if they came in and they said, we don't want as many foreign players. And then they bring in more foreign players. The fans would go nuts. I was thinking about the car analogy that I keep coming up with. When it came to selling a Brexit, imagine if you'd gone around and said you can have any car you want. I instantly thought of The Simpsons, where Homer's allowed to construct his own car from scratch.
I'm ruined!
But you're literally going around to the public and say you can have any car you want. And one person goes, well, I want monster truck wheels. Another one says, and they're going, yeah, you can have that. You can have monster truck wheels. Another one's going, actually, I want it quite small, like a mini. And yeah, you can have that. And then another one says, I want a horn. I want 5 different horns all over the car. Yeah, you can have that. And they construct this monstrosity car. They drive off. You want a bigger engine? Yeah, you can have a bigger engine. I mean, it's just...
And it's going to be cheaper than any other car. That's what they told as well. It'd be cheaper.
It'd be cheaper to run with monster truck wheels and a smaller engine. What has the EU ever done for us? Can you come up with something off the top of your head as to what the EU has done for us?
Every 2 streets there's a freaking building with a plaque on it saying it's been funded by the freaking EU. Like, infrastructure. It's been great, I don't know.
It took when Jenny was here in Italy, I took her to see a castle that was it's maintained by funding from the EU. I think if this funding wasn't available, you wouldn't be able to visit most of the castle or the walls of this city. So a few years ago, I visited the Titanic Museum. Titanic Museum in Belfast is co-funded by the European Union. So if that money wasn't available, I don't know if the museum would exist, but yeah, thanks to the EU, people are able to enjoy a better experience at the Titanic Museum.
I'd say we had a stronger pound, which meant imports were cheaper and the cost of living was cheaper.
And the single market.
And the single market. No
passports
paperwork
would last until they expired.
Yes.
Pain in the ass.
Right, on that note, we're done.
Bye-bye.
Be sure to tune in next week for another exciting story from the files of Police Squad.